Brian Hooker told police his wife's passport went into the ocean with her. A day later, he needed a brand new one just to get on a plane. Lynette Hooker went into the water that night holding a dry bag. Inside it, the only key to their dinghy's engine and both of their passports. But if that bag really went down with her, why did her husband need an emergency passport of his own less than 24 hours later? Somewhere in Michigan, her daughter still checks her phone some mornings out of habit for a text that isn't coming. So if the passports weren't really gone, what else in Brian Hooker's story wasn't true either? Over the next few chapters, we're going to walk through the messages he sent in the days after, one lie at a time, and show you exactly where they fall apart. And by the end, you'll understand why investigators stopped believing his timeline. Before we go further, one thing. Where are you watching this from tonight? Now let's start with what he actually said happened. Brian Hooker told Bahamian authorities he and Lynette left Hopetown on their small dinghy after dark on April 4th, heading back to their sailboat, Soulmate. Rough water hit, Lynette went overboard. She had the ignition key in her hand, so the engine died with her. He said he paddled for hours, alone, in the dark, until he reached Marsh Harbor Boatyard around 4 the next morning.
CBS News has learned new forensic evidence appears to contradict Brian Hooker's account of where he says he was the night his wife Lynette went missing in the Bahamas. Brian Hooker told Bahamian police Lynette fell out of their dinghy and was swept out to sea the evening of April 4th, and he was lost at sea for several hours.
That's the account he gave police first. It's detailed. It's specific. It's also the version everything else in this case keeps testing. Here's a question worth sitting with before we go any further. If someone you loved gave you one small detail that turned out to be false, would you still trust everything else they told you? Because the small details are where this story starts to wobble. Brian didn't call his own stepdaughter, Carly Aylesworth, until Sunday evening, hours after he says he reached shore, hours after he reported Lynette missing to police. Carly later told CNN that when he finally called, he sounded monotone and relaxed. Not shaking, not broken, just flat. Compare that to what he wrote 3 days later in a Facebook message to a friend named Daniel Danforth. In that message, he described Lynette going off the dinghy in some choppy seas, right around sundown, the wind carrying him away from her before he lost sight of her completely. It's calm, it's sequenced, it reads like someone who has already told this story more than once. 2 accounts, 2 audiences, and they don't quite line up. His police statement puts the accident well after dark, while the message to Danforth places it at sundown. Small gap. We're not done with it yet. There's one more detail worth planting here before we move on. Danforth also told Fox News Digital something the search never used, that Brian Hooker had a high-tech tracking camera mounted on his own boat, one that was never deployed to help find his wife. Why a piece of equipment built to watch the water sat unused while she was still missing is a question this case hasn't answered. Hold on to that. What's strange here isn't that Brian made that call to Carly, it's how he sounded making it. A man learning his wife is truly, possibly gone tends to sound broken on that call. Halting, repetitive, unable to get the words out clean. What Carly describes sounds closer to a report than a collapse. That's not proof of anything on its own. It's just not what shock usually sounds like. Somewhere in the dark that night, an 8-foot dinghy moved across open water, and only one of the 2 people on it would ever get to describe how. Because here's what we do know. For certain, by the end of this account, Brian Hooker gave 2 different tellings of the same 10 minutes to 2 different people in 2 very different tones. That much is settled. What he wrote next, in writing to the people who loved her most, is where the story really starts to come apart. What he typed to a grieving friend 3 days after his wife vanished is where this case turns from strange to provable.
Daniel Danforth is friends with the Hookers.
Do you have a message for Brian?
Yes. The only thing that's going to set you free, Brian, is the truth. Find enough inside of your heart to come out and tell the truth. We all deserve it.
The friend's name is Daniel Danforth, and his exchange with Brian is the one independently confirmed by a named news outlet. But he wasn't the only one. A family friend named Kelly, Lynette's, not Brian's, reached out to Brian by Facebook message
CBS
just
News
3
has
days
learned
after
new
Lynette
forensic
disappeared.
evidence appears to
Those
contradict
messages haven't
Brian
been
Hooker's
independently
account of where
verified
he
by a
says he
named
was the
outlet.
night his wife
They've been
Lynette
shared
went
with the
missing in the
podcast
Bahamas.
covering this
Brian
case,
Hooker told
source to
Bahamian police
family.
Lynette fell out of
Worth
their
knowing
dinghy
up
and was
front,
swept out to
because
sea
what they
the
contain
evening
is
of April
heavy,
4th,
and
he
we
was
want you
lost at
weighing
sea
it
for
fairly.
several hours.
According to those messages, Kelly asked Brian on April 7th whether any family had arrived yet. Brian wrote back that Lynette's parents were already there, and so was his sister and her husband, all of them helping him stay focused. Reporting since then has never placed Lynette's family on the island that early. Her daughter Carly hadn't yet arrived. If accurate, that's not a vague answer to a hard question. That's a specific claim about specific people in specific places, the kind of claim you can check. And there's an older thread running underneath all of it, one almost nobody's connected out loud until now. In 1999, Brian Hooker's first wife, Elizabeth Hoseth, filed for a protective order against him. In it, she wrote that in their final confrontation, he'd threatened her with, her words, an accident. That was 1999. Call it 26 years ago. 27 now. And in 2026, the word he used to explain his second wife's disappearance, in writing, to a friend, was the exact same one, an accident. Sit with that for a second. Not the story, the word. We're not going to tell you what to make of that. We'll just put both lines in front of you. In 1999, he threatened me with an accident. In 2026, his own words, the recent boat accident in unpredictable seas. Same word, same man, 27 years apart. There's a second layer to this, closer to home. A 2015 Michigan police report shows Lynette accused Brian of striking her in the forehead and choking her during a fight. He accused her of hitting him first. The case closed with no charges. Investigators couldn't determine who started it. Two women, 2 decades apart, describing strikingly similar fear around the same man. Two women, 2 decades apart, both remember hearing the word accident from the same man before the worst day of their lives. Is that a strange coincidence of vocabulary, or a pattern worth taking seriously? We'll let you sit with that one. Somewhere in a Michigan courthouse, a protective order sat filed away for 27 years, waiting for someone to read it next to a missing persons report. There's something we should say plainly here, because we don't want to oversell what we don't actually have. We genuinely don't know if the Kelly messages, as they've been relayed secondhand, are complete or word-for-word accurate. That's a real gap in the record. We're not going to pretend otherwise just to make the story cleaner. What we know now, with full confidence, is this. The language of accident did not begin the night Lynette Hooker disappeared. It began decades earlier, in a filing meant to protect somebody else from him. But patterns and memories can be argued with in a courtroom. A phone's own location data can't be. What his phone recorded that night has nothing to do with what he said, and everything to do with where he actually was. And somewhere in that same stretch of water, a mother who still checks her own phone for a text is waiting to know why the two don't match. One more quick check-in before we get there. Where are you watching this from? Whatever Brian Hooker's phone recorded, Lynette Hooker was never just a name in a case file. For more than a decade, she lived on that water, filmed it, loved it. A woman who'd dip a 360 camera into the sea just to catch dolphins swimming past the hull. She and Brian ran a shared
CBS
channel
News has learned
documenting that
new
life,
forensic evidence
called the
appears to
Sailing
contradict
Hookers.
Brian Hooker's
Whatever
account
happened to her
of
happened to
where he
someone
says
who
he was
trusted
the
that
night
water
his
enough
wife
to make it
Lynette
her
went
home.
missing in the Bahamas.
Brian Hooker knew that
Brian
water
Hooker told
too.
Bahamian police
Years
Lynette
living
fell out of
aboard,
their
handling
dinghy and was
anchors,
swept out to
engines,
sea the evening
GPS
of April
systems,
4th,
and
he
Bahamian
was
channels
lost at
most
sea
people
for
never
several
see.
hours.
This wasn't a man improvising somewhere unfamiliar, which makes one detail harder to explain. According to friend Blaine Stevenson, Brian had moved Soulmate alone before, without help, during an earlier separation from Lynette. But the morning he needed to leave Hopetown this time, he needed a bystander, later, a volunteer firefighter, just to help raise the anchor. A competent sailor suddenly needing an extra pair of hands for something he'd already proven he could do alone. That's not proof either. It's just a gap worth naming. And then, the piece that actually reshapes everything before it. Investigators pulled GPS data from a marine navigation app on Brian Hooker's own phone. That kind of app doesn't ask questions and doesn't get tired telling a story twice. It logs a device's position automatically, in the background, whether the owner remembers to check it or not. And what it showed didn't match what Brian Hooker had told investigators. His device's track shows it stopping, idling, in the Sea of Abaco, then turning back. A location he never mentioned, a stop he never explained. Then investigators found something else. CBS News confirmed the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service seized Soulmate itself as it was leaving Bahamian waters, sailing at first to Fort Pierce, then onto a dock in Fort Lauderdale for forensic examination. Drone photographs obtained by CBS show her there, sails stripped off, sitting alone at a federal dock, months after Lynette vanished. They didn't stop at the boat. Investigators separately seized the 8-foot dinghy, the exact vessel Lynette allegedly went overboard from, with a cadaver dog present during the search. And then the line that changes how you read everything before it. A U.S. official told CBS News this case is now being investigated as a possible murder, and that the GPS discrepancy is what pushed investigators back into the water, searching areas they'd never looked at before. Investigators, in other words, no longer believe the story he told them the first time. We should say this honestly, too. Even now, even with all of this, Brian Hooker has not been charged. As former FBI Special Agent Nicole Parker told Fox News Digital, the reason why we have the vested interest is because the suspect is Brian, and he's a U.S. citizen. The victim is Lynette. She's a U.S. citizen. That's jurisdiction, not a verdict. What the GPS proves is that he was somewhere he said he wasn't. What it can't yet prove is what he was doing there, and that's the question this case still hasn't answered. Here's a thought before we head into what's left. If videos like this matter to you, if you want to be here when a case like this finally moves, hit like so this reaches the people still searching for answers. Share it with someone who'd want to know, and subscribe to Casebreak Network, because we're breaking cases and following every lead, this one included. One more thing investigators still haven't spoken publicly about, whether that tracking camera aboard Soulmate, the one Danforth mentioned, has been fully processed yet. If that changes, it may be the next real break in this case. What remains unresolved is bigger than any single contradiction. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Until she is, this case cannot truly close, no matter how many holes investigators find in the story he told. And it's worth saying plainly, Brian Hooker has not returned to the Bahamas since he left, and no official reason has ever been confirmed for that either. That too stays open. Somewhere in a Florida evidence locker sits one recovered flotation device, one emergency passport application, and a phone whose location data says more than its owner ever did. Right now, tonight, the water off Elbow Cay is exactly as dark as it was the night she went into it. There's one detail we keep returning to, and it isn't about him at all. Before she disappeared, Lynette had already bought a one-way ticket home, for herself, alone. She never told her mother why. It may be the very thing that finally brings justice for Lynette Hooker, because investigators piecing together her final days keep asking her family's own question: why didn't she get on that plane? Picture it for a second. The version of that week where she boards it, a taxi to the airport, a window seat, her phone buzzing once she lands with a message to her daughter that says almost nothing, just that she's home. That flight never happened. That text was never sent. She never got the chance. This is the Lynette Hooker case, the GPS data that reopened it, and the husband, Brian Hooker, who still hasn't explained why it doesn't match his story. If you want to be here when this case finally breaks, hit like so we know to keep digging. Share this with someone who needs to see how the pieces line up. And subscribe to Casebreak Network, because we're breaking cases. And we're following every lead until this one has an answer. Somewhere a phone that used to buzz with her name on it stays quiet. That's not just evidence anymore. That's what's actually missing. What's the one detail in this case that made you stop believing him? Tell us below. We read every one.